Well, since getting a new entry into a Capcom franchise is like wrangling a release date out of Square Enix, it looks like it's quick buckaroo time over there again. 2 Devil May Cry updated editions in just 1 year. Usually when a series like this isn't providing really any new true sequels and instead is just cashing in on a bunch of quick and dirty updated ports, it gets a bit aggravating. But these are 2 rather flawed games, albeit in different ways. So maybe this is a good time to fix the mistakes of the past before moving on to greener pasture. Now I'm going into this under the assumption that you're familiar with the original versions of these titles. If you want a more overall review of these games, I have older videos up on this channel covering the OG releases. Here we're just going to be taking a look at some of the changes and seeing if it's worth buying these games all over again. You know, I was thinking of doing a video on DmC Definitive Edition back when it first released, but it took me about a week to play through, and by that point most people had forgotten about it, which is a bit of a shame because this is a far superior action title to what we got the first time around. The awful cringe-worthy f***a-doodle-doo story, yeah, well there's no amputating that tumor really, is there? I heard they added a new cutscene, which I think I saw. I don't know, I was kinda skipping every scene I could this time around. But aside from all that narrative stuff, the game does elevate itself quite a bit with some of its additions. But before that, let's get some things out of the way. 60 frames per second.
Fucking finally!
Once upon a time, it was like, oh no, that don't matter. F the cops. But now it's like on the frickin' box and sung from the hilltops as one of the most important upgrades. I'm glad that after DmC 4 ran at 60 FPS on the PS3, it only took a system with 31 times the RAM and 8 more cores in the CPU to get your game running at the same fidelity, Ninja Theory. Not that I'm throwing a parade or anything, because it's probably worth noting that if you have a PC, this game has been playable like that for some time now.
So you must be the secret ingredient.
So apparently 60 FPS means we can have a turbo mode now, and as was the case with DmC 3 Special Edition and Devil May Cry 4 on PC, this gives the combat a far slicker pace. Before the release of the original DmC, it seems like Ninja Theory was pretty much ignoring the community when it came to adding anything into the game that fans may want to see. Definitive Edition flips that shit on its head because now suddenly the game is packed left, right and center with hardcore fan extras. Well, except for the fact that fucking paradoxically, the update isn't on PC, which is the preferred platform of high-level players. A lock-on mechanic was added, but before we break out the bubbly on that one, its implementation still leaves a lot to be desired. Lock-on finally allows Stinger to be performed without double tapping forward, but that's about all it does. Rolling with jump or holding back to perform high time or anything similar is still a no-go. The secondary attack command and dodge button could have been entirely done away with now, but we wouldn't want anybody to realize how unergonomic we made those controls in the original now, would we? I mean, lock-on is here now, but it's still a challenge configuring it to make it comfortable. What with shoulder buttons having to be held down to use alternate weapons, I ended up switching the command to toggle, which always had me forgetting I was locked on at entirely the worst moments. It is nice to have enemy health bars now, but the entire concept of adding a lock-on to DmC really just brings into focus how many options were taken away in comparison to previous entries. Like in the original version, making parries simply about timing a swipe at the same time as an incoming attack may have been a less clunky way of integrating defensive mechanics into the game, but now that lock-on is a thing, it's like, where's my rolled guard release? Why is the alternate gun attack count, like, halved? Well, at least we have Demon Evade, which if you don't remember was a table hopper sort of move that buffed the player's attack so hard it made bosses a straight up joke. Here its effectiveness is reduced a fair bit alongside the addition of an upgradable Angel Evade, which serves as a pretty fun novelty for the move lineup. Some other things I like? Well, remember when secret missions were shut away behind locked doors that needed a variety of different keys to open? Yeah, remember that fun time? Well, they still do, except there's only one type of key now. One type of key, one type of door, so extra busy work levels are reduced slightly. Color-coded enemies that deflect all but weapons specific to their design, aka the worst idea of all time, and now attackable with any weapon. Just only staggerable with the ones they're color-coded to anyway. Yeah, I know these are some monkey paw wish tier upgrades so far, but we do have hardcore mode now. This makes for a nice little change of pace. A style meter that really doesn't f**k around. Devil Trigger not weirdly freezing everybody in the air that can also be earned faster, and enemies that hit a little harder. If you stack all these changes on top of each other, you have an experience that far surpasses the original release and elevates DmC from a janky revision of Devil May Cry to a tolerable enough action game. At least in terms of gameplay, it still stands heads and shoulders above most Western action games, even if it still can't hold a candle to the combat of the original series. With, you know, its lack of inertia, inferior move count, more restrictive character kits that reduce player expression, and its Shakespearean dialogue. fact, there are some additions here that are ideas I'd like to see implemented in the main series. Must Style mode, where a player needs an S rank in combat to do damage, or Gods Must Die difficulty. These are neat additions for high-level players. If nothing else, DmC Definitive Edition is a game that acknowledged its major flaws and attempted to fix them. Devil May Cry 4 Special Edition, though, is a title that does just about the exact opposite. You know, back in the day, it was easy for me to say that Devil May Cry 4 was a legendary game, but had a lot of flaws because the devs didn't get enough time to realize its full potential. 7 years after its initial release with Special Edition, that assertion starts to lose a bit of credibility when the game is just as unfinished now as it was back in frickin' 2008. What was DMC4's biggest flaw? Well, probably that it had a plethora of deep and engaging mechanics, but nowhere near enough content for it to be implemented in tandem with. What did Capcom decide to do with this updated release? Add even more mechanics! If Devil May Cry 4 felt bare bones as before, now its game world feels infinitely more minuscule with a total of 3 new characters added to the mix with 0 new enemies or levels for them to be used in. And don't misunderstand, these are some fun characters to play as, but DMC4 already lacked the enemies, levels and bosses to support just Nero and Dante's moveset. So adding in 3 new punters lays a magnifying glass over just how little there was to see in the original game. The selling point here is more people to play as, but since none of the new fighters have exclusive levels or bosses and are just meant to be used in the same levels as Dante and Nero, what you're getting here is a game that sells itself on the player partaking in the same campaign 3 times, one for Dante and Nero, one for Virgil and one for Lady and Trish, in a campaign in which one already had to play through the same levels twice anyway. And this is just not a prospect I see really selling all that well to the mainstream consumer. Virgil basically takes the form of his DMC3 incarnation, with his trademark Yamato returning alongside Beowulf and Force Edge. He's really fast, and his ability to teleport all the way across the stage instantly means any downtime had in combat as Virgil is squarely on the player. I mean, I can kinda take or leave the concentration meter. It's a really cool idea, not running or missing attacks to build up power for deep landing cuts, but with a lot of Virgil's moves being powerhouses anyway, I didn't concentrate on it much. The benefits it adds to moves isn't really all that beneficial when the player can still just do this. Well, maybe that's until we discover Judgment Cut End, at which point you barely even have to fight. Hold attack, charge concentration meter, go into corner, activate Judgment Cut End. Nah, don't sweat it, you're invulnerable the second you start charging. You've basically just been in the game. Yeah, so it doesn't take a whole lot of skill to make Virgil one of the most powerful characters in the game. Jump cancelling and keeping enemies airborne is made really easy with his teleport, which basically also serves as an instant whoops, I'm gone move that can be activated basically whenever an attack is incoming. In fact, it could be argued, and I will argue, that the teleport's ability to glue Virgil to enemies, apart from making the camera go a bit mental from time to time, does make farting around in the air a whole lot too easy. Like, I ain't even jump cancelling half this shit and I'm not going anywhere near the ground. All that said, the variety of weapons he offers is enough to add a nice amount of complexity to that versatility. And learning precise timings for attacks for improved judgment cuts is a nice little bit of added strategy to separate the true masters from the novices. Lady is a bit of a letdown. Credit where credit is due, in terms of adhering to her character, I don't really see any other way this would have been done. Since she's the only character who's 100% human, she relies mostly on firearms and has no devil trigger. But at the end of the day, Devil May Cry is a hack and slash. As cool as Lady's guns are, I play DMC to slice and dice my way to victory, not to lock on and stay on the other side of the room shooting away like I'm playing, Resistance Retribution? Or, you know, something. Whatever. It's way too much of a viable strategy. Trish, on the other hand, was pretty neat. While she may only have her guns and the sword Spada, it was rather fun to experiment with her at first, since the moves she has available change depending on whether the player's thrown Spada out for crowd control or not. A little restricting, yeah, maybe, but it did make me approach situations a little differently by having to keep in mind where my sword was at, even if that added element of strategy did seem to be making up for her somewhat otherwise lack of depth. One thing to note is that both Virgil and Trish both have moves that can only be pulled off by spending Devil Trigger, which seems like a bit of a cop-out way to give the characters really overpowered attacks. I mean, yeah, it was fun to blow enemies away with Trish's Pandora or Virgil's homing knives, but it would probably have been more interesting if the effectiveness of these moves could have been counterbalanced by requiring a little more skill to initiate them, in a similar fashion to Dante's use of Pandora or the way Lucifer's spikes have to be landed. I mean, even Nero's DT-specific moves have to be timed and charged fairly well to be pulled off. I mean, yeah, Virgil was kinda like this before, but he was never this overpowered with his knives. But if you got that meter with Trish, it's like swish swoosh vamoosh. Not to mention a lot of her attacks are straight up invulnerable anyway, so I think I'm safe in saying the new characters are kind of overpowered. Nevertheless though, at the end of the day, action game characters don't come much more cathartic and fun to experiment with than when they're crafted by Itsuno and his team. It all just goes back to what I was saying earlier though. Devil May Cry 4 is like a house with one bathroom that now 5 people are living in. The roof leaks from time to time and some really annoying smells seep up from the basement. Basically what I'm saying is there's no more room left in the fridge for these guys to move in. Can we get a bigger living room too? No, I just want to move out honestly. I've been here for 7 years. I mean the plumbing is exquisite, but it only makes up for so much. So yeah, would I have preferred Dante to get his own levels and bosses instead of making the old cast playable again? Yeah, pretty much. Story-wise, if you were expecting any kind of new narrative developments in the world of DmC, I suggest looking elsewhere because there's nothing of substance here. Capcom really underestimate how much the happenings of this universe are enjoyed by its fans, and it's a shame because even the minute, tiniest, gnat-sized bits of new character interaction we get in the bonus cutscenes here, it's enough to remind one why seeing this series continue is something so many want to see, me included. Of course, I'm definitely not talking about Virgil's ending here. Disappointment was brought to a whole new level. What did you guys even do for this cutscene? You get Dan Southworth in for a day and ask him to walk in place? Gotta say, there have been a few weird changes to the base game. Some good, some weird. The best of which probably being that outside of combat, dashing activates pretty much automatically, which cuts down vastly on the tedium of getting from place to place. Twice. Though how when implementing this edition nobody on the dev team asked why the hell get more orbs is surviving the transition, an ability that just cuts down on busy work that shouldn't be there to begin with, baffles me. The acquisition of Proud Souls to upgrade moves always seemed a little slow in DMC4, so the rate at which they're obtained here has been increased. Though it almost didn't have to be now, because with all 3 campaigns being accessible at any time with a universal Proud Soul count for all of them, you can go to one campaign and back to the other and have points to spare. A fact that makes the fuck off micro DLC bullshit the game launched with all the more confusing. This isn't some free-to-play multiplayer game, Capcom. Anyone can get a few Proud Souls in a few hours. Buying super modes? This is madness. A weird omission too is multiple save files. The hell did this have to go for? You got more than one person living with you who want to play their own file? Well, pretty fucking basic feature since Legend of Zelda and goddamn NES. Well, you're out of luck, even on the PC version. DMC4 OG had one of the best PC ports of all time, but SE seems way more finicky. Most of the footage you've been seeing so far is from the Japanese PS4 version, and that's because I was actually experiencing some slowdown on PC, with weirdly inconsistent loading times too. So is Devil May Cry 4 Special Edition worth your money? Well, if you look at the game as DLC for the original, basically we're talking 3 extra characters and a few alternate skins for 20 quid. If you never played DMC4 on PC before, then I guess you can throw Legendary Dark Knight difficulty and Turbo mode in as well, even though most of us have had that shit for 7 years. If you can rationalize it as that, then you might find yourself enjoying the added features. And hey, maybe if you haven't played the original game for like a million hours like me, you'll enjoy it more on a second buy. But perplexingly in that regard, this is kind of a product for the fans. I don't see a lot of new people warming up to the series with this re-release considering the recycled content from the original outing is still present. It's just sad because I feel like if we were in the PS2 era, not in this super expensive landscape of doom where we have to beg for any little morsel of content, it wouldn't have been such a big deal to add maybe a level or 2 more in here after 7 years. Like, for Rizzle, you're seriously telling me we couldn't have at least had a boss rush mode in here? No, but we get updated ports all the time, and DMC4 SE is way more content than they usually do. Oh, so because everybody else is used to being f***ed in the ass, I guess the second somebody offers to bum me but lubes up first, I should just pucker up and take this shit. Well, nah, sorry, it's one thing to re-release a game that was already finished, and another to re-release one that clearly wasn't. I just really hope Capcom doesn't look at SE's sales to justify making DMC5. Not just because I don't see this game making much coin, more so because the current state of Devil May Cry is squarely on them. If you don't buy DMC4 SE, you haven't failed Capcom as a consumer. They've failed you as a service provider. Their failure was not making a game like this for 7 years and then expecting the same amount of people to be around to fund the series. AAA games with high budgets get most of their money from the casual consumer. And aside from a few juggernauts, their interest lessens if products aren't released in succession. It's why we get another Assassin's Creed like every year begging for attention. It's Ubisoft's like biggest thing, they'll go under if it doesn't sell. Devil May Cry was never really niche. Capcom made it niche by sitting around doing naught. But at the end of the day, it would be ludicrous for Capcom to put the impetus to make DMC5 on something like SE. And not just because the impetus to make DMC5 should have been the millions they sold 7 years ago when people still knew about the franchise, but because gauging consumer interest in a new entry in a series by asking them to buy one of the old ones again is probably one of the stupidest nuggets of logic that is also prevalent through the years of the Capcom ransom we've been suffering. Devil May Cry is great, but every time a game comes out, it feels like there's more potential to be tapped. And I think everybody's patience for that potential to show up is getting thin. Devil May Cry 1 had its fair share of repetition, but it was a humble little game that worked within its means and turned out pretty sturdy. DmC 2, as we all know, was god-awful. Devil May Cry 3 was brilliant, but you could still tell there was corners being cut, it just did a good enough job at covering the rest up. DmC 4 barely touches a completion of 50%, and the content that's missing is patched up pretty horrendously. This is an extremely uneven series, and if something doesn't come along quickly, it's going to be remembered that way regardless of how much fans like me sing its praises. I sympathize with the devs, it's probably not their fault they don't get to finish things proper, but if Capcom aren't prepared to let them complete a game, then that starts to become irrelevant pretty quickly to the consumer, and even I can't live off what coulda beens forever. Don't get me wrong, Devil May Cry 4 Special Edition, I'll no doubt be playing this game endlessly for the next few years just because I love this combat so much. I will always squeeze dry every little bit I can get of it, but as it stands, the Devil May Cry series is definitely not back yet. Hey gang, thanks again for watching and supporting the show, it means a lot to me. And I will try to keep optimistic. Hopefully Devil May Cry 5 does become a thing and is just as glorious as it deserves to be. Shout out to my boy Vash the Shell Bullet on YouTube who collected some additional footage for this video. If you like action games, there's plenty to check out over on his channel. As usual, if you just can't get enough of me, there's my Twitter and Facebook where I shoot the shit and just have a good time. Catch you next time and take care of yourselves.
Nobody comes unbreakable.
Hey Hayden. I got a great idea.
Yeah.
Why don't... Now hit me out on this. You know you're really good at doing a Virgil impression from the DmC reboot. So why don't you do him? But doing the monologue from DmC 4 Special Edition.
Okay.
Okay, do it.
Dante. I guess I can't call them misguided. But soon, they shall know this devil's power. A power greater than they ever imagined. A power of a Nephilim of Sparta.